So, Terry, the last, just before the internet went down the third time, you were telling us about the secret deal between France and England, or Britain, rather, in 1915, was it? During
that's right.
Actually, during World War One, while it was still going on.
They weren't busy or anything.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, so I'm okay to go on now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Please.
So they did this deal, and then 2 years later, in 1917, was when the infamous Balfour Declaration was made, which incidentally was in the same week as the Bolshevik Revolution, in November 1917, when Balfour was the Foreign Secretary under Lloyd George, Prime Minister. And then at Christmas, December 23rd of 1917, Rudolf Steiner gave a talk in which he spoke about, for the first time, he revealed a new kind of cycle or rhythm, if you will, in history, which is not related to zodiac or astrology or anything like that, but is actually related to the rhythm of the life of Jesus Christ, 33 and a third years. And he said that if you have an event, whether that event is positive or negative in social affairs, it's not a personal thing, not an individual biographical thing. It's something that happens in society and history. That if you have an event, positive or negative, it's like a seed is planted by that event, which 33 years later, 33 and a third years later, will resurrect, so to speak. And in fact, he used the terms like Christmas and Easter. It's like a birth and then a death. You know, the birth of Jesus at Christmas, and then the death of Jesus at Easter, Jesus Christ at Easter. So it resurrects 33 years. And then again, 33 and 30 years after that, it goes on a step further. And then a third step further. So 33 and a third years times 3 is 100 years. It's a century.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can see that something which was planted by that seed 100 years ago goes through a whole process through these 3 phases over a century. And in this case, in this particular case, just bear with that for a moment, yeah? But in this particular case, we're looking at 1915 to 2015. And as I said, the year before, 2014, Cold War started up again between the West and Russia with the events in Ukraine, Kiev. And then ISIS started up. And one of the main goals of the ISIS movement was to erase the borders that had been laid down by this secret Anglo-French agreement, the Sykes-Picot agreement, in 2015, 2016. So what ISIS wanted to do was to get rid of all those borders and create to return, in effect, to the 7th century Islamic Caliphate, where there would be no borders. There would just be one great Islamic ummah, or community, empire, if you will, ruled over by a caliph. So Steiner introduced a new principle, active in history since the time of Jesus Christ there. So that's very interesting in itself. But that's just one aspect.
It's a heck of a coincidence that you have between 1915, we have this secret deal between the British and the French, drawing lines in the sand of the Middle East. And then 100 years later, we have the appearance of ISIS wanting to tear those lines across and reinstitute a caliphate.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Wow.
And then sorry, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to highlight, because you almost skipped over that, Terry, but You know, you say the 33 and a third. We've had three of these cycles, these 33 and a third cycles, and pretty much, 100 years later, we have this correlation happening.
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight it. Sorry.
That's right. No problem. And then there's another one, for example, because you can do this with almost, any year really, that in 1923, and I wrote about this in my article, there was another secret, this wasn't a secret deal, this was a secret British government report called the Cavendish Report, February 23, by the new colonial secretary, Victor Cavendish, the Duke of Devonshire. I don't know if your readers can see, your viewers can see that.
Yeah.
That's the man
Nice
himself,
mustache.
the Duke of Devonshire.
Mm.
And he was the colonial secretary at the time, a Tory. And they carried out this, an investigative committee, a 10-man committee. And they looked into, well, how effective has Britain's mandate been? Because there was a lot of people who were unhappy in the Conservative Party at the time about this mandate, that Britain had taken it on. And some people were saying, well, maybe we should drop it. And also the mandate included the Balfour Declaration that had been made in 1917. So the League of Nations mandate included that Balfour Declaration. And many people in Britain were not happy about that Britain had given this promise to the Jewish people that they could have this national home, so-called, within Palestine. Because we'd also seemed to make a promise to the Arabs in 1916 that we promised them that the Sharif of Mecca, the prince, if you will, of Mecca, that he and his descendants, if they helped us beat the Turks, this leads on to the Lawrence of Arabia story, maybe many of your viewers have seen the movie, that if they promised to help us beat the Turks, then we would set them up as rulers of the whole of the Middle East, the Arab lands of the Middle East. That was in 1916. So we made that promise to the Arabs, and then the following year we made the promise to the Jews that we would give them a national home in Palestine, which we had a year before promised to the Arabs. So anyway, then in 1923, this committee carried out this investigative investigation to see if this had been a success, this declaration, the Balfour Declaration and the mandate, and if we should carry on doing it. And they came to the conclusion that it hadn't been a success. It had not worked at all. And that furthermore, it wasn't likely to work, but that we should carry on regardless anyway, for the sake of Britain's good name and our reputation, which would be dirt if we suddenly dropped it.
Right.
So, they didn't make that public to the British government. To the British public. They only revealed it after 1948. So the secret report of 1923 was revealed only, I think it was about 1950 or 51, that the Cavendish report was finally revealed to the British public. So that's quite incredible, that the British government had already recognized that the Balfour Declaration was a failure, the mandate was a failure, we're not likely to make it succeed, but we have to go on with it anyway.
And what were the motivations behind the Balfour Declaration? Why was Britain, felt obliged to conform with this, to put this forward?
The Balfour Declaration?
Yeah.
Well, in 1915, there had been the attempt to defeat the Turks in a direct attack at Gallipoli, right?
Oh, yeah, Churchill's famous for that, because he was he royal, he was head of the Navy, was he, at that time, something like that?
Yeah, First Lord of the Admiralty, that's right.
The one, yeah.
So, and he's rather associated with that. But it was, as you know, that was a great failure.
Yeah.
So the question is, well, if we can't take them on directly, what other way can we hope to get at the Turks? Because of course the Western Front was stuck in stalemate. So the hope was, well, if you can knock out Germany's allies like Turkey, or get in through the back door, attack Austria-Hungary, Germany's other ally, via the Balkans or something like this, which would mean knocking out the Turks, maybe that's the way to go. That was the thinking.
Okay.
And so what options did they have? Well, they had the option of bringing in the Arabs and starting a revolt behind the lines, so to speak, in the Arab lands. And that led on to the whole Lawrence of Arabia thing and the Arab revolt which started in 1917, preceded by this promise to the Arabs that I mentioned earlier. But in addition to that, only several weeks after the Great War started, the first Jewish cabinet minister, which we had in our history, not including Benjamin Disraeli, who nominally was, of course, he was Jewish, but his family had converted to Christianity. His father had converted the family to Christianity. So nominally, Disraeli was not Jewish, but racially he was Jewish, and he was very proud of being Jewish.
Yeah.
So the first formal practicing Jewish cabinet minister was Herbert Samuel. He was Minister of Local Government in 1914 when Britain went into the First World War. And only a few weeks after we went into the First World War, he went to the Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, and said, if we maybe this is a time where we could give to the Jewish people who've long wanted it, their own state in Palestine. And if we did that, that would be a very good way to bring in the support of a lot of rich Jews in Russia and America. So that was the suggestion he floated in early November, I think it was, to Sir Edward Grey as an idea to the beginnings of what you might say is of a Zionist suggestion to the British government. Of how they could use Jewish sympathies to help to bring down the Turks, because the thinking was that there are many wealthy Jews in America, and they could help to bring America into the war on Britain's side, which obviously would be a great plus. And the same in Russia.
This is so 4D.
That would help to keep the Russians
isn't it?
in the war, basically.
It's so 4D chess. It's like we don't really care about Israel and giving Jews a homeland, but we have wealthy people in powerful countries like USA, and if we offer this olive branch, we can get these wealthy guys on side, and they not just through money, but I'm guessing there'll be wealthy Jewish people in the media that will help with propaganda, putting the message out, that sort of thing.
There's always an agenda. Looking after
indeed.
number one.
But although we have to remember, Phil, that there are quite a few wealthy Jews in Britain who are opposed to this notion. They were opposed to the Zionist plan because they were very comfortable in Britain. They had good lives. They weren't in a hurry to get on a boat and emigrate to very hard circumstances at the time in Palestine. Yeah.
Right. So what did Palestine look like as far as the map goes? I mean, there were Jewish people living there, weren't there, at this time?
There were a few. There were probably, I can't remember the exact numbers. There probably would have been about 50,000 max at that time.
Right. Okay.
And there were over 500,000 Muslims.
Okay.
So, from the late 19th century, gradually Jewish emigration to Palestine started to increase. I think around about the time of the First World War, just before it started, there were probably about 15 to 20,000, something like that. And gradually the numbers slightly went up, but they didn't really begin to take off until after the First World War, of course, and then largely because of this mandate.
Yeah.
And in the 1920s and 30s, they really took off, especially after Hitler came to power in Germany. Just backtracking a bit, though. So Herbert Samuel, who was, I wouldn't say he was a fanatical Zionist, he was a moderate Zionist, but he was a very well-connected individual. And so he floated this idea to the British government, and then Sir Edward Grey brought it to cabinet, and then Herbert Samuel and Edward Grey kept reminding cabinet of this over the next couple of years. Then Gallipoli failed. And then came these two thoughts. Well, maybe we could try these other two tracks, the Arab track of the Arab revolt against the Turks and this Jewish track of promising the Jews their homeland or their independence under the British umbrella, of course.
Yeah.
And that will bring in the Americans. This was the hope. So that was what led on to answer your question, this is what led on to the Balfour Declaration, because by 1917, then America had entered the war. It was absolutely key. Russia had dropped out and America had come in, and it was absolutely key that the Americans should stay in and see the whole thing through. So it was very important for the British government to keep the wealthy Jews on side, the wealthy Jews, particularly in America. So, as I say, that's why that led that when Balfour himself had gone over to America in 1917, and he'd met many of these wealthy Jews, and this was obviously the message he'd got from them as well. So he came back and really pushed the thing forward very quickly, and the Balfour Declaration then came out in 1917. But what I wanted to get to with this Cavendish report was that Cavendish report was 1923, right? So here we are in 2023, last year, 7th of October. And then the whole thing starts on the 7th of October, which is where we are now, 7 months on. So there again, you've got another 100-year cycle, between the Cavendish report, where the British government said, well, we're not going to do anything, and we're going to carry on with this policy, which we recognize is not working and it doesn't have any prospects of working or satisfying anybody, but we're going to carry on with it anyway and waste a lot of British government money, British taxpayers' money. And already a lot of people have died by then in rioting and intercommunal violence, etc. But nevertheless, they carried on until in 1940, after 1945, they realized they couldn't manage any longer. But Cavendish, the other thing about this was, though, on a mercenary nature, Phil, was the Suez Canal, the realities of the Suez Canal hadn't changed. The realities of the oil fields in Iraq hadn't changed. So the oil in Iraq had to be piped across the desert from Iraq to Haifa on the Mediterranean coast. That was a British aim, yeah?
Right.
Because that was a much more direct way of getting the oil out rather than taking it round the Persian Gulf and up the Red Sea and through the Suez Canal. So if they could just get it across British-controlled Iraq, which the British then created after World War I, puppet state, Kingdom of Iraq, and then pipe it to Haifa and then out through the Mediterranean. So this is another big reason why the British wanted to gain control of Palestine after the war. The French had wanted to get it because the French had had their interests in Syria, which are purely sentimental, really. But the British insisted, well, you can have Syria, but we must have Palestine. They managed to twist the French arm and get the French to agree to let the British have Palestine, the mandate over Palestine. And in addition to keeping that oil flowing, which is absolutely necessary for the Royal Navy and therefore for the British Empire, for British imperial power, also, for the same reason, the British control the Suez Canal. And so if you had a system in Palestine where British troops under mandate auspices could be based, then of course you could have further tight control over the Suez Canal, because just at that time, 1922, both Ireland and Egypt were the two parts of the British Empire which were in revolt, and in fact in 1922 had begun the process of freeing themselves. So the British looked at the prospect of having to leave Egypt, you see. So if they had to leave Egypt with their troops, well, how are we going to make sure that we keep control of the Suez Canal?
Yep.
okay, this is where our control of Palestine comes in. So if we get the support of the Jews, they will do our bidding in Palestine. We can keep control of the Suez Canal. So that was the thinking of these Tory imperialists. And just one other thing, that because the Duke of Devonshire who was one of Britain's most preeminent aristocrats, he said in his report, quote, "We should indeed, if we had to return the mandate to the League of Nations and repudiate the Balfour Declaration," he said, "we should, quote, indeed stand convicted of an act of perfidy from which it is hardly too much to say that our good name would never recover, and we shall stand for all time as the Christian power which, having rescued the Holy Land from the Turk, lacked the strength or the courage to guard what it had won." You know, it's a very kind of medieval point of view.
Wow. It's like a crusader.
Well, exactly. That's exactly what I wrote. Yeah, I mean, it's like the mindset of a 13th century aristocrat.
Yeah, like a Norman king going to Israel to protect the pilgrims. Holy cow!
So, but it's like concepts of honor and duty and obligation, noblesse oblige, and all of this. You see, but I'm not saying that was necessarily the main goal. The main goal was the main line of the need to keep that oil flowing, the need to keep the control of the Suez Canal for Britain's imperial interests. But he was an aristocrat, and so he had these other motivations as well.
I was going to say, surely these theological motivations play a huge role, because, goodness, I mean, unless you come from Japan or China and maybe parts of India, Jerusalem maybe isn't a massive concern to you. But for us in the Western world, the history we have, that all goes back to this area. I mean, I mean, you know, I imagine that it's not insignificant, the role that the Abrahamic faiths play in all this, in the motivations of individual politicians like Balfour and so forth.
Well, that's right, and that leads directly into the next sort of esoteric aspect of this, Phil. In 1900. A Russian philosopher died, Vladimir Solovyov, and he wrote a remarkable book at the end of the 1890s. I think it was published just before he died, called War, Peace, and the I'm just trying to get the War, Peace, and the Coming of the Antichrist, I think it was. and what he laid out there was that in the next century, or within about 120 years of his own time, he prophesied, if you will, in this book, that beginning with a war between Russia and Japan, that this would create the conditions through which, I'm sort of making it very short now, this would create the conditions in which a remarkable individual would come forward who would take over the West, would take over the Christian world, and would pretend to be a Christ-like figure. And he would be accepted by most people in the West, and he would create a world government. And he would, in effect, rule the world.
I've got it. It's Klaus Schwab.
Hang on a second.
I was going to say.
A Christ-like figure.
I'm still waiting to be accepted.
You will eat the bugs. Where's he going? He's going checking his library.
Yeah, I'm not going to find it. I'm not going to find it now. Sorry.
Oh, you're looking for the what was his book? Oh my god,
Vladimir Solovyov.
Solovyov,
yeah, that's Solovyov, Solovyyov.
Fantastic. I'll add that to my list.
Yeah, have you not got
These
it?
Russian guys, fantastic.
War, Peace, and the Coming of the Antichrist is, I think, the title.
Cool.
And he, so this is what he wrote about, and that this remarkable individual succeeded in sort of pulling the wool over the eyes of many of the people in the Christian communities of the West, Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox. Yeah, and he would rule the world eventually from Jerusalem.
Wow.
Well, that's the interesting point. So, in other words, this anti-Christic figure, as he put it, yeah, would seek to rule the world from Jerusalem. Now, of course, this begs the question, doesn't it? What is the reason why this tiny community, and I think there are only about 15 million Jews in the world, yeah, what is the reason why this tiny community have had this incredible impact, particularly in the last 100, 150, arguably 200 years or so? Yeah. What is the reason for that? And what is the reason why, since World War II, again and again and again and again, we have seen so much violence and turbulence affecting many countries throughout the world, precisely over the destiny of this particular community? And I think it doesn't matter whether you're religious or an atheist or whatever you are, you have to recognize that this has definitely got to be bound up with the relationship between Judaism and Christianity. It goes back to the relationship between these two faiths. Yeah. So, right. So trying to get my thread back there.
I'm just racking my brains to who the prophesied Antichrist might be.
Right. Well, Rudolf Steiner gave the answer to that in not the name of the individual as such, although he did make a crack a joke and say it would be somebody with a name like John William Smith. In other words, Phil, it would be somebody from the English-speaking world.
Okay.
It would not be a Russian. It would be somebody from the English-speaking world. But he wasn't particularly thinking directly of what Soloviev had forecast there. He was, and by the way, Soloviev was a Russian who was very much concerned about what he saw as the threat to Russia from the Chinese and the Japanese, at the time. And of course, war did break out in 1904. The Japanese were functioning then as our proxies against the Russians.
And beat them.
We built the Japanese battleships. The Americans funded the Japanese armies. Yeah. So the British and the American elites were using the Japanese as their mercenaries to do what they themselves weren't able to do, didn't have the armies in that region to do, to fight the Japanese, to protect their commercial interests in the Far East, and to keep Russia out of Manchuria, which is where it was trying to get into at the time. So Soloviev could see this struggle developing between Russia and Japan in the Far East. And already before he died, and the war did break out, and the British supported the Japanese in that. In fact, Japan was Britain's first formal ally in 1902, Anglo-Japanese alliance. So, but Steiner in 1919, so this is 2 years after the Balfour Declaration, 2 years after the Russian Revolution, in the winter of 1919, he gave 8 lectures in which he spoke about the incarnation of 2 beings, one a very long time ago. Well, 3 beings, in fact. One was a very long time ago, 3,000 years before Christ. Then came the incarnation of Christ. Then came another incarnation, or rather would come, and that, he said, will happen before only a part of the 3rd millennium has passed. And since then, people have been trying to figure out, well, how long is this only a part of the 3rd millennium? So obviously this means sometime after 2000, or around about in 2000, or perhaps even 1999, 1998, before only a part of the 3rd millennium has passed. So these 3 incarnations are incarnations of great beings. So this is going right straight into some quite heavy duty occult knowledge or occult insights. The first being, I mean, he gave names to 2 of these beings. Obviously, the name of the Christ, everybody knows. That's the middle of the 2 events.
Yeah.
3,000 years before Christ is the incarnation of what the being that Steiner called Lucifer. The being who incarnates in the 21st century is the being to whom he gave the name Ahriman.
Man. Oh,
Now
no. I'm
What?
worried now. I don't want to... That's bad news, Terry, isn't it?
It's good news if you're a technologist. It's good news if you're, Harari or Schwab or I don't know about Musk, arguably Musk. Any of these people, the transhumanists, the AI community, basically what we have seen, Phil, since Steiner said that in 1919, this Ahriman being, who's obviously a spiritual being, he although he's going to incarnate once, each one of these beings incarnates only once as a human physical being. Why? That's another whole issue one could get into. Yeah. But the Lucifer being incarnated in China, 3000 BC. The Ahriman being is going to incarnate, Steiner said, in the West. And people who are interested in Steiner's work, including myself, and I've written a fairly long article about this, which is on my website, threeman.org, about the incarnation of Ahriman, when and where. Looking at the various things that Steiner said around in these 8 lectures, and also in other lectures that he gave around the period, there's a very interesting one, for example, in 1917, where he compares Ireland with America and the different esoteric aspects of the 2 regions. You can see from these comments that it is, when he says in the West, he's not meaning Portugal, Spain, or Ireland. He's meaning North America, let's say. I won't say the USA, because he doesn't say USA, but he's talking about North America. He's talking, I would argue, particularly about the west of North America, where you have the Rocky Mountains running right down the continent, the backbone of the continent, and then going on down into the Andes, which are kind of like the geomagnetic, electromagnetic citadel, the sort of backbone of the American continent.
Yeah.
And that particular region and the subterranean levels of the American continent in that region, and we should remember also, of course, it's where above Canada, north of Canada at the moment, is where the magnetic pole is at the moment. So he's pointing to, this is the place where this individuality is going to be. And so America is going to function, the USA, I would argue, is going to function as the stage of this event. Now, who happens to be the biggest supporter of Israel in the world? Well, I've said, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether Biden wins or whether Trump wins. Both of them are 100% behind Israel. Yeah. After the British gave up on Israel-Palestine in 1947, the Americans stepped straight into the breach, and America stayed in the breach since then, with spending, what, $3 billion, is it, to Israel every year since that time?
Yeah.
And we've seen how much more they've just given in the latest tranche of 61 billion total. I think 26 billion of that went to Israel, and then 49 billion to Ukraine, and the rest to Taiwan. Yeah, so clearly the connection between Israel and America is extremely strong right across the piece. I would argue that maybe the only 2 sections of American society in which the Jewish population have not got a stronghold is the American military and the American intelligence services.
Really?
But in media, in the arts, in finance, in corporates, this, again, very small community. What is the Jewish population of America? Something in the region of 6 to 7 million. And yet it's clearly, everybody recognizes, including the Jews themselves, they're very chuffed about it, and they often say so as much, both in their own publications in America and also in Israel, that they recognize their clout, within their cultural and economic clout in America. So this is quite a remarkable phenomenon. And And then we have to recognize the fact that who is the Roman Empire of our time? 2,000 years ago, when Christ incarnated, he incarnates in a country which is under Roman control. Today, we see, well, people argue, is America under Jewish control or is Israel under American control? Well, maybe what happens within this Gaza issue might give us a clue about that. No?
Yeah, wag the dog, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
arguably.
it's interesting. So, but my point is that America is today what Rome was 2,000 years ago in a smaller neck of the woods. America is today quite clearly globally. You've got rivals, just like you had the Persian rival to Rome 2,000 years ago. But within the Mediterranean world, and of course, Mediterranean means middle of the earth, doesn't it? Mediterranean. That was their world. That was the world for the people in Europe at the time. And the Rome was the empire. And Israel was part of that empire. And so today we see this incredible relationship between America and Israel.
What's really interesting, though, if you go back to that Roman times where, you know, the Syria, Palestina was kind of a backwater of the Roman Empire. It was a frontier. It wasn't a significant place. You know, the heart of the empire was Rome. They were obsessed with Greece and you know, Egypt and for the wealth, the bread basket.
That's true, Phil. And Egypt was really important because of its wheat supplies to
bread basket.
To Rome. But remember, if you couldn't get to whatever reason, if you couldn't get to Egypt by sea, you had to go over land.
Yeah.
And that meant you had to go from Asia Minor down that coast.
Sinai,
all those armies, including Alexander the Great and all the rest of them, who for thousands of years have been trooping through what is Israel, right? So strategically, it was quite an important region. And of course, it was next door to this front line of the struggle between Rome and Persia, which went on for many, many centuries. But just to go back to these three incarnations. So what do we see facing off in the 21st century? We see China facing off against America. And in between them is Russia and Europe. Unfortunately, Europe has become a puppet state, the EU, and of course, Britain is a separate little puppet state of the USA, right? So just as Herod was a puppet ruler of Rome, so Rishi Sunak is a puppet ruler of Rome, and we're living in a puppet state, in effect, yeah?
Can I just say high five for comparing Rishi Sunak to Herod? I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I don't think Rishi will get round to building. Will be allowed to get round to building rebuilding the temple, but, like Herod did. But
no,
but you get my point.
Yes, yes.
But the thing is that you have these two cultures. Iran and China are two of the oldest cultures in the world. Arguably, Iran is older than China as a continuous state polity. As a state polity, unified China has only existed since about 220 BC. But Iran goes back way beyond that. So Iran and China are two countries with incredibly long memories. But the Jewish people are also a population with a very, very long historical memory. And as you know, you go back to the kingdom of David and Solomon, you're going at least back to 900, thereabouts,
BC,
1000 BC. Yeah? So we've got these three populations, two of which are states, with these long, long memories. And then we've got this new big upstart kid on the block, the USA, which was born out of Britain. Now, why was it born out of Britain? Because in each one of these incarnations, Lucifer, Christ, Ahriman, and that's an incredible cosmic balance in itself, by the way. Yeah? I mean, we could talk about that in a minute, but basically what that means is a force of expansion in the east, a force of contraction in the west, and the balance between them in the middle, which is the Christ force. When I say contraction, expansion, I mean I'm using those two very abstract terms in the broadest possible sense, whether that means within the human soul or whether that means within geopolitics, whether it means in philosophy, you name it. But it's expansion, contraction. It's off-planet, airy-fairy, dreamy, arty-farty, whatever you like.
Lucifer.
And it's also super technological, hard-ass, this kind of
materialist
kind of thing.
Yeah, Ahriman vibe.
So, and that is the Ahrimanic.
Yeah.
And Steiner points out that if you want to look, Lucifer is the being who they're like pans on a scale, Phil.
Yes, yeah.
And this balancing scale weighs inside the human soul, and it weighs outside in nature, it weighs outside in history. Yeah? So when you see Lucifer inspires the world of the arts, if I'm allowed to use that shorthand, Ahriman inspires the world of the sciences, the world of control and power, and rationalism and five sense material reality. And Lucifer inspires the realm of imagination, free-spiritedness, in the sense of I do what the hell I want and I don't care about anybody else. It's that kind of thing. So these are two extremes, and the human soul has to find his way between these two extremes. Yeah. But these three extremes have to be these two extremes, and the balance have had to be represented in physical incarnation, in history, within these last 5,000 years. So 3,000 years BC, 21st century, this is a 5,000 year period. Remember, before even only a part of the third millennium has begun, right? So we're talking about a period of 5,000 years. And that period of 5,000 years is the period of what you might call maximum spiritual darkness within the history of humanity. So you're all, I'm sure you're both familiar with the term, the doors of perception. Right?
Aldous Huxley, yeah.
I don't know if either of you are Doors fans. rock band, But that's where the name comes from, right? Yeah. Aldous Huxley, the doors of perception. William Blake, the doors of perception. Cleaning the doors of perception. 3,000 years BC, natural clairvoyance was a human heritage. So people were born with the capacity to see into the spiritual world. But gradually, those doors began to close as humanity descended deeper and deeper into material reality. Yeah. Okay. So we couldn't go deep into physical material reality without losing something. Right. Gains and losses. It's a bit like comparing the beauty and the wonder of a little baby infant with the 15-year-old who's wrestling with puberty.
Oh, Steiner talks about this, about kids before the age of 5, is it? Before the age of 6, how they see the world, how they perceive things.
Absolutely.
The consciousness, the quality
even
of the consciousness.
Now, that's right. Even now, parents will, some parents, not all, but of course, but some parents will recognize their child seems to be talking to certain beings. Their child seems to be able to see certain things. Their child refers to certain beings in the garden or out in the countryside or what have you,
Oh, but that's just an imaginary friend. Forget about it, little Johnny.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And the intellectual parent comes along with something like that.
Yeah.
And usually after the change of teeth, around about 6 or 7, that for most children, that kind of thing does close down.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a beautiful poem by William Wordsworth about this, intimations of immortality, about this process, and what happens to the child, what the trailing clouds of glory do we come, from the spiritual world, and then how he talks about how the shades of the prison house then close in on the growing child, and so on, when the child goes to school, etc. So the process of growing up and descending into material reality means we lose this natural contact with the spiritual world, and that was really, really true for our ancestors thousands of years before Christ. It was an inevitable process, and it started And because we no longer had the capacity to do that, then the spiritual world, as it were, instituted what came to be called mystery centers, where human beings were trained artificially to try to regain this contact to the spiritual world. So they had to go through various processes in order to do this, either with or without the aid of certain substances, yeah? Or they had to be put to sleep for certain 3 days in which they were taken through various processes and so on, right? But these were artificial processes of training, and they were called the mysteries, and they existed in various cultures, including the Jewish culture and the Egyptian culture and the Babylonian culture. And gradually over time, these mystery centers became corrupted. So by the time of Christ, they pretty much were all corrupted in that region. Yeah?
Right, it's all about the money by then, wasn't it? And gathering wealth and paying tribute to the Oracle of Delphi or the Eleusinian mysteries.
Exactly. And that was one of the ways in which it did become corrupted. But it also became corrupted because simply through this process, this long process, 3,000 years of descent, even the mystery trainers and initiates themselves became less and less able.
Yeah, got you.
So, then they just tried to con their pupils and disciples by, raking in the money and various other things. Yeah?
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, I'm just saying that these three pillars, if you will, great pillars of the structure or the temple of human history over this last 5,000 years, in this darkness, spiritual darkness of the last 5,000 years, it's precisely in this period of darkness that humanity has had to find its freedom. So as this 5,000 years period has gone on, and the turning point is precisely the time when Christ incarnated in Jesus of Nazareth, then the collectivism, and I'm not using that word pejoratively, but descriptively, yeah?
Right.
Where the human individual is subjected to race, to nation, to gender, to tribe, to clan, to family, yeah? All the individual has to give up himself or herself for the group. And that has gradually changed. And after Christ, the move more to the individual finding his or her own way, this is through a lot of heartache and pain, but gradually through this period of spiritual darkness, that has come to the fore. And the further from the east to the west you go, during that 5,000 years, the more that has been the case. But now we are seeing, particularly in the last, say, 200 years, it's also been the case in the East as well, yeah? That people in the East too are challenging these traditional collective forces within their own traditional cultures in order to find their own way as individuals.
Wow.
But now in front of us comes the incarnation of Ahriman, the inspirer of our Western technological worldview.
Oh my God, it's Elon Musk, isn't it?
The inspirer of Western materialism. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got to try and imagine all of the technological brilliance over the last 400 years, since the time of Francis Bacon, who was arguably the person who really started to crystallize this way of thinking, yeah, in England. Ever since that time until today, including the internet and everything we have technologically, try and imagine all of that intelligence as the brain or the mind of one being, and that's only the beginning of it.
Sounds
right?
nice. Yeah.
Imagine a being with that level of intelligence. And when you try and think of that, then it becomes a bit mind freeze. But of course, as many people have pointed out about people like Harari and AI and all the rest of it, that kind of intelligence does not have life, does not have real creativity, does not have real spontaneity, does not have real improvisation. It's a way of being that proceeds in an ordered, logical form. Yeah. And it's a way of life which is seeking to, by all of these incredible things it can lay out for us through its on-off states of electricity, and all the beauties that can come through that, all these apparent beauties, it traps us and tempts us through that. And it's trying to trap us and tempt us, as Mr. Harari makes also clear, into actually giving up our human nature completely. So having sacrificed, and I'm sort of slightly sidetracking here, but Steiner points out there have been 3 abolitions, Phil. In the 9th century, the church attempted to abolish the human spirit. In the 19th century, Western psychology and Marxism attempted to abolish the human soul. There is no soul.
Yep.
And in the 9th century, the church at the Council of Constantinople in the year 869, 870 said, in effect, and I would have to explain this a lot more, but just bear with me, okay, that there is no individual spirit. You have to depend on the church and upon its dogmas for you to find the way to God. You can't get there yourself. You can't initiate yourself. You have to depend on the dogma of the church. This is the spiritual path. That was one of the canons laid down in the Council of Constantinople, 870.
I think, is that the same council that banned reincarnation?
No, that was
Chalcedon.
The 5th Council, 553.
Yeah,
that was
Chalcedon, I think. Yeah.
But that was another step on the same path, really.
Yes, yeah, it's the same journey. Yeah.
Exactly. So you end up depending on the dogmas of the church. Do you see, right?
Right.
So that's where, if just like the priests in the mystery centers had gradually lost their capacity to initiate people to find a way to God, to the spirit, so the priests, the priesthood and the Vatican, they had lost any whatever small degree of real spiritual capacity they had. So they now insisted you must follow dogma. You must become, you can be an intellectual. As an intellectual, use your intellect to follow our dogma and understand it. Yeah. Okay, so they sought to abolish the individual spirit. Then in the 19th century, it was the abolition of the soul, the abolition of through psychology, Freudian psychology, Marxist psychology, both of those two Jews, by the way. Marx, the son of a rabbi.
Yeah.
And then now what we are looking at is the abolition of the human body itself. So the abolition first of the spirit, then the abolition of the soul, and now Ahriman is looking to lead us into the abolition through AI, through transhumanism, of the abolition of the human body. So it's a threefold abolition, do you see, of spirit, soul, and body. And this is a quite mind-boggling prospect of evil which we face, and which we have to understand and face down. And we can only face them down through the understanding of it. And so in a sense, we've got to be grateful to the likes of Schwab and Harari, because now, as you know, they really are spelling all this out very clearly.
Yeah, and Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil's been saying for decades, the singularity is near.
And the age of spiritual machines.
He's on a mission to abolish our physical form and upload your consciousness. That's his goal. You know, I want to figure a way of uploading the human consciousness into a machine that will be immortal. What kind of life is that?
That is a great way to lose weight.
Steiner would say that behind this thinking is the thinking of Ahriman.
Yes,
so
materialistic.
The spiritual being of Ahriman is inspiring this thinking through their thoughts, which they then project out into the world. And this thinking also inspires the technologists who faster and faster and faster, because that is another Ahrimanic gesture. Ahriman seeks to push us into the future faster than we are morally and ethically ready to go. Lucifer seeks to draw us back into the past, into his beautiful world of dream and dreaming, illusory dreams about the past. Yeah,
I think where a lot of it might come from, Terry, is the abolition of the soul in the 19th century, and I think what motivates a lot of these technologists is because they have no faith. They're so materialist that they are terrified of death, and that's what's motivating them essentially. It's fear.
Yeah, exactly. And then if I can try and bring, because I was talking about America, right? And America as the cultural stage on which Ahriman is going to appear. Now, Christ came into the body of Jesus of Nazareth, right? Now, if we take seriously the words at the beginning of the Gospel of St. John about what the Christ being is. I mean, the word Christ is frankly, I mean, the word Christ is a Greek translation of the Hebrew word Meshiach, and Meshiach simply means the anointed one. So the king of Israel, of the united Israel, and the high priest were anointed with oil. So a special oil was used to anoint these persons, purification oil, if you will. And the translation of that was chrism in Greek.
Yeah.
So from there, the anointed one, Mashiach, is the Christos, right? So the Christ simply means the anointed one. But the important thing for us to realize is that for the Jews, the person that they are waiting for, the Messiah, is a human being. It's not a spiritual being.
Okay.
It's not a being who is going to incarnate out of the spiritual world into a human being. It is an actual human king. It is a political ruler. And this ruler that the Jews are waiting for will be a ruler like an Islamic caliph, who is, as it were, both a political ruler and a theological ruler in one. Yeah.
Presumably, he would have to have some sort of lineage from Solomon as well.
Yeah, indeed. And then you're probably also aware that right now there is something called the Temple Institute, which is preparing to rebuild the temple in order to accelerate the coming of the Messiah.
And then we have hardcore Christians again in North America cheering this on because they see this as prophecy being fulfilled, that the third temple, the temple will be rebuilt and will be raptured.
Phil, interesting you used the word steering there, because of course there is a red heifer involved in this, right?
Oh,
the cow.
yeah, let's
and
get
that red
heifers.
That red heifer's come from Texas.
Yeah, they're looking out for it. These farmers, these cattle farmers in Texas. Let's get this perfect, because it's part of the prophecy. We'll have this perfect red heifer who will be sacrificed.
Could it be an orange heifer?
Nope.
well, Ben, there is a legitimate argument in the Jewish community, Orthodox community, as to whether it's a red heifer or an orange heifer or a yellow heifer. Linguistically, the words are somewhat similar, so to speak. Yeah. Anyway, the heifers have been flown over from Texas to, and they're already there. They've got a farmer with the land. They have a pure priest who has been trained, and they have the land which is looking opposite the Temple Mount. What they have to do is get rid of the Dome of the Rock.
Hey man, everyone's got to have a hobby.
That's the mosque,
right? And then that's what they need to do, they think. And then they sacrifice the red heifer. Then they mix the ashes of the burning of the red heifer with special water. And then the pure priest is able to purify the people of Israel from their sins. And then they're able to build the temple. And then the Messiah will come.
Yeah. Will the temple have Wi-Fi?
Well, it's the modern world.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's the modern world. Even the Orthodox Jews, when it's not Shabbat, they use Wi-Fi. Yeah, they've all got their mobiles, right? So it probably will.
Okay, good.
but it won't be used on the Sabbath. That's for sure.
This is what's terrifying. This is what's terrifying. If these people get their way, the carnage. I mean, just removing the mosque, just removing the dome on the rock.
Yeah.
This is terrifying.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. But you see how all this is coming together.
Yeah.
Right. And then, so we're looking now in the 21st century at the coming of Ahriman. Now, I was just saying that this is another big Anthroposophy is a stream of Christian esotericism, but there's a big difference between traditional Christianity and the Christian esotericism Rudolf Steiner, and that is that Steiner points out that Jesus of Nazareth was a man. He was born of a woman through the normal process, and that the spiritual being who is the Logos, who created the solar system as we understand it, at least, and probably out to the zodiac as well, or the stars of the zodiac, at least. I'm not going to say anything more than that, but at least our neck of the woods, so to speak, cosmically speaking, yeah. If you take seriously those words from the Gospel of the St. John,
yeah,
where it speaks about the Logos, and who the Logos is and what the Logos did, and then you think that Logos incarnates into a human being, how long can a human being sustain that energy?
I'm going to say 3 years and a third, 3 1/3 years.
Exactly.
So are we, because Terry, last time we spoke, you recommended a book to me, The Two Children by David Overson.
All right.
And it had it answered so many questions. It gave me such an interesting perspective on the nature of Christ. And I think that is this where you're going, that the key event is the baptism by John.
That's right. Exactly. So it's those 3 years. Yeah? It's not 33 years. It's 30 years of the preparation of the vehicle, so to speak.
Yes.
And that preparation of the vehicle is the very, very last step in the process, which goes right back to Abraham. So if you're looking at the whole history of the Hebrew, Israelite, Jewish people, then, because remember, those are 3 stages in one story, right? Hebrew, Israelite, Jewish. Then that is a preparation to produce a body which can serve as a vehicle for the being which created our part of the cosmos. Yeah. I mean, that's a mind-boggling thought. Yeah. So in that sense, the Hebrew, Israelite, Jewish people have performed an incredible service on the part of humanity.
And then they killed him.
Equally, I'm sure Rudolf Steiner would say, the Chinese people performed a likewise sacrifice on the part of humanity by bearing the being of Lucifer. And if you think of what effect that has had on Chinese culture until today, I think one can still see that. And then in the future, I think we're going to see, and are seeing, have already seen, the sacrificial deed of the people of America, because they are going particularly to have to bear the being of Ahriman. And now, how long is that going to last? Because as with the being of Christ in Jesus, yeah, it's not going to be very long. It may not be 3 years. It may be a bit longer than that, 7, 12. But personally, I wouldn't expect it to be any longer than 12 years, something like this. So Ahriman is not going to be with us for centuries. He's going to come and he's going to do what he has to do in a very fast and intense way, and that will have consequences on into the future. But when he comes and does what he does, it will wake up a lot more people that are already woken up now. A lot more people who have been woken up through the Ahrimanic vehicle of the internet, for example.
Right.
Because you both know that the internet, because of what it's made available to a lot of people, and the internet is an Ahrimanic product, it itself has resulted in a lot of people waking up. And a lot of them have woken up to spiritual reality precisely through understanding the forces of evil. Yeah. And this is one of the paradoxes.
Does Ahriman have to be a human?
Yes.
Yeah,
Stein points out that all of these have to be human, Ben. Okay. That Lucifer, Christ, and Ahriman, they all have to have what he called eine fleischliche Inkarnation, a fleshly incarnation. So it's not going to be the internet. It's not going to be a robot. It's not going to be an AI. It's got to be a human being. Whether that human being is in some way
augmented.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the word. Yeah. Whether that human being is in some way augmented, that's a moot point. Yeah, but it's got to be a human being in some way, like we three are. Yeah.
This would be a
So-
great film. I'm just thinking of like some guy in a coma, and then they introduce some tech to him, and like
You're thinking of RoboCop.
shit, I am as well.
It's a couple of things, couple of questions that, because we know.
Yeah, I'm
going
sorry.
on-
It's all of this is a bit much, isn't it?
No, I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it, Terry. A few things that come up. You mentioned about there's a certain polarity, so that you've got Lucifer on one end and you've got Ahriman on the other end. These are the polar poles that pull.
They're the pans of the scale.
Yes, and we're, the way I interpret what you're saying is that we want to be in the middle. We want to be looking at this Christ consciousness. How do we navigate that? How do we pull ourselves towards the middle, to the balancing act?
Right. Well, I think first of all, we've got to understand those three phenomena. Yeah, we've got to get familiar with what these three phenomena are, and then we've got to start to educate ourselves, to train ourselves for looking for these three gestures, if I can use that word. Yeah, these three gestures, and I think actually, even in our pop culture or our media culture today, whether it's in the world of rock music, whether it's in the world of movies, everywhere, basically, even in politics, I think you can see these three gestures. And of course, you can also see them if you've trained yourself, even to a small extent, to look within your own soul, to see those moments in your own life when you're pulled in one direction.
Absolutely.
And then you're pulled in another. When you're pulled and you feel the blood going to your skin, and you're feeling embarrassed, or you're feeling proud, and those two words, you are both English, you guys, right?
Yep.
So, I'm a bit older than you. Back in the 60s, there are two words which were hardly ever used in the English public scene, and they were pride and passion. It was not the done thing to talk about proudness. I'm proud of this. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the other. And passion. You've got to be passionate about this. Oh, I'm passionate about that. And these days, everybody says that, don't they?
Pride is
they're
the
always
first
saying that.
deadly,
Pride and passion, right?
it's the first deadly sin, Terry, pride.
Yeah, but those two things, pride and passion, those are two hallmarks of Lucifer right there. Yeah.
Wow.
It's the egotism of Lucifer. I'm on stage kind of thing. Yeah. It's that sort of attitude, yes.
Yeah.
And then the other is the opposite, is the cold, cool, concentrated, utterly logical mind of Ahriman, and who's not interested in anything subjective at all, and will fragment and break things up as much as he can. Whereas Lucifer will try to draw you into some great big collective thing behind a great big Pied Piper who just loves himself. Yeah? And that takes many forms, yeah. But you look back in history, you see countless examples. But if you look in yourself, you can see, in addition to embarrassment, when you feel embarrassed or ashamed, or when you feel super proud about something, then Lucifer's working in your soul. And if you feel cold towards anybody, or you feel you push them away, you feel, coldness is the best, I suppose. Hardness, harshness, hardness, coldness. You shut people out in any way whatsoever, yeah? Then an Ahrimanic voice is kind of whispering in your ear. Yeah? So we've got to get used to our interior space to see where our thoughts come from, where our little whisperings come from in our minds. Yeah? And saying, no, thank you very much. No, thank you very much. And I just stay in the middle space, in the balance. Yeah?
Introspection is the key, isn't it? A lot of us don't have the time or the energy to stop ourselves and analyze what we're thinking about consciously and what influences are pulling us this way and that way. Well,
exactly.
Luciferically and Ahrimanically.
Yeah.
So
if you're into martial arts movies, and I'm not particularly, but I like historical movies. If you watch Chinese historical movies, for example, you'll often see them making this gesture.
Yeah.
Touchy.
Or sometimes it's like this,
Mm.
and sometimes it's like that, right? And that's quite remarkable. What they do is they bring these two hands together like this or like this, and then they bow out of respect to the person in front of them, right? So what are they doing there? They're bringing together from the left hand the periphery, and they're bringing together from the right hand the point, the closed fist. This is the expansion gesture. And if I were to do, where's my hand? There it is. If I were to do this, that's even more luciferic. Yeah, if I keep my fingers together, that's already a bit Aramanic, you see, it's a bit contracted.
Yeah.
But if I do hi, this kind of thing, yeah. Then, but if I say, well, that's the periphery, and then here's the point. Yeah. And then out of the center, you bring the periphery, the expansion and the contraction together, and you bow out of respect to the other person. I think, that's a beautiful gesture that you're seeing there from China, which it shows the three things together in a way that you're the master out of this calm balance over these two extremes. Yeah. So the important thing we have to realize, the church, unfortunately, through its lack of insight into both heaven and hell over the past 2,000 years, has tried to persuade us there are only a twofoldness. There is heaven and there is hell.
Right.
The harpists on the clouds,
Yeah.
and then there are the stokers down below with the tridents and the horns and the tails. It's that or the other thing, right? But no, it isn't. It's a threefoldness. And what we call evil is not just one thing. It's actually it's a fourfoldness. But I'm just going to look at two of them.
Terry, we were so close.
Yeah, but basically, Ben, it's contraction and expansion. All right. There are two other forces as well, but we won't go there today. But the main ones are contraction and expansion. And what you could call radical evil is radical imbalance.
Right, yes. So you can be luciferic or Ahrimanic, but you're out of balance. You've gone off piste, and you've gone off the scales. Terry, we've been going well over an hour with all our false starts as well, and I'm really conscious of how generous you've been with your time tonight, and I've absolutely loved this.
No problem.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. We will do this, but one thing I want to ask you about, you said earlier about these three incarnations that Steiner talked about, and they're only going to happen once. We only get one shot.
Yeah.
Well, it begs the question: what happens after the Ahrimanic incarnation?
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let me try and before we finish, then let me try and deal with it as briefly as I can. Right. I said 5,000 years. So if you think of that, it's not only humanity, by the way, it's the planet itself, and it's not only the planet, it's the solar system. So if you think of our solar system, just again talking about our neck of the cosmic woods, that our solar system is condensed out of spirit into matter, like in a great in-breath. It condenses out of spirit into matter, and we also, human beings, along with that process, we also condense into matter out of purely spiritual beings. Now we are spiritual beings having a material experience, right?
Yeah.
So we come to this point of a maximum in-breath, and now we have to breathe out again. So we're now in the process of re-spiritualization, and that's going to be, of course, extremely long. It's going to take a very, very, very long time. It's a great long story, yeah? But at the very bottom of that huge letter U, shall we call it, at the very, very bottom of that are these 5,000 years I just mentioned, right? So 5,000 years ago, 3000 BC, approximately the time when Lucifer incarnated into China, the doors of perception closed. the doors of natural clairvoyance closed, right? And we entered into this period of darkness, where spiritual darkness, where we were challenged and the gods, as it were, withdrew, parents withdrew, and we had to find our freedom and we had to find our love by ourselves. Yeah. We had to find the freedom and the love in the darkness. But that darkness period has come to an end. And in 1900, the doors of perception, Steiner points out, began to reopen again. So from 1900, we enter a period where natural clairvoyance begins to return. So human beings are now being born who naturally are clairvoyant from childhood, and they don't lose it. The problem is that because of this long period of since Christ and since 3000 BC, many people, especially in the West, where we've lost all sense, for example, of reincarnation and karma as well, we lost that. So we haven't got anything which helps us to really make sense of what are these strange experiences which I'm having. So you're getting more and more young people being born who are having experiences of spiritual beings, whether these spiritual beings are beneficent or malevolent or whatever they are, and they can't make sense of them. Yeah. And this is a facet, this is an aspect of this reopening of the doors of perception. And this is going to grow and grow and grow. So it's really important that people begin to understand this esoteric understanding of the evolution of consciousness over the last 5,000 years. And these three pillars are like the pillars of the temple, if you will, of this period of darkness. Yeah. And Ahriman, Phil, has to come now, because his goal, from his point of view, his part in the play, the drama, if you will, is to persuade us that there is no spirit. There is no spiritual world. There is only five-sense reality, right? So keep us locked in this material prison. Nothing happens after death. Nothing happened before birth. No. You got your 70 odd, 80 years. That's it. Right? Unless I can give you another 120 through my trans whatever. Yeah? But anyway, you know. but basically, it's a short time, relatively short. Yeah? Even Harari is beginning to talk about 120 years, but beyond that, he doesn't go. No. So this is Ahriman's task, to con us into thinking there is no spirit. And now, if he doesn't do that soon, Phil and Ben, then the number of people who are being born with this natural capacity, do you see the problem from Ahriman's point of view?
Yeah, too many. Too many.
He's on a loser.
Yeah.
He's got to persuade humanity somehow now, before too many people wake up. He's got to persuade us to get into this AI transhuman trip, change our bodies, download our pathetic little consciousnesses, which we have at the moment, into some kind of machine, ceramic, mechanical vehicle. And then he's really got us by the short and curlies.
Yeah, total control. That's the end of the game. That's the end of the game. If we start all downloading our consciousness en masse, that's it. It's game over. You're never evolving.
So he's got to do it now in the 21st century.
Got you.
Remember what I said earlier on about a century is 3 times 33 and a third? So a century is a kind of time organism. It's not in terms of 10 tens or 100. It's 3 times 33 and a third. Right? Which is the etheric life body of Jesus Christ. 33 and a third, yeah? So 3 of those make 100 years. And so that periodicity of 100 years is really what it's about. And so 21 of those have now passed. So humanity is becoming adult. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Right? So, and again, you might think, well, that's a bit weird, but, you know, but think about it. Right now, I mean, we can laugh at Greta Thunberg, and frankly, I often do. But, you know, the point is that the Greens, bless them, they do have an intuition that we are responsible for the planet. Right? So for the first time in our evolution, we now are all aware that we are responsible. And it's up to us. We have to take care of our vehicle, our physical, cosmic, planetary vehicle. Yeah. And that's the truth in what the green movement is about. The truth of it. It's carbon, net zero, CO2, all that rubbish. No. But in their key intuition is we've got to take responsibility. And that's due to our becoming adults, becoming responsible.
Yeah. Well, Terry, we've got to sign off. This has been absolutely fantastic. It's been lovely to speak to you again. Yeah, and really honestly, thanks for that recommendation. That David Overson book had a massive impact on me.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, I thought you might like it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it gave me a completely new perspective on the nature.
I'll dig out the Soloviev book.
Oh yeah,
send you the right title.
What
I'm pretty sure that's right, but I might have a word or two not correct there.
What is it with these Russian guys? It's like I've been reading Uspensky recently, and he blew my mind about the fourth dimension. It's like, yeah, there's so many great authors out there which get overlooked, and we need.
But then on the other hand, there are people like Alexander Dugin. Have you come across him?
No, I've not read any of him.
Sad case. Tucker Carlson just did an interview with him.
Oh, he's new. He's a new guy.
Oh, no. Dugin's been around since, in Western consciousness, about 20 years now. Right. But he first started appearing in the 80s. And the Western elitist mainstream media talk about him as Putin's brain, which is a load of nonsense. But he's a dangerous Russian.
Oh, I know the name now. I know it. I remember now.
His daughter was assassinated by the Ukrainians 2 years ago. Yeah. Which is sad, but he's a dangerous Russian. We shouldn't be listening to him, or at least if we can listen to him, but he's, he's not somebody to. He's actually trying to bring about a mega warfare situation between East and West.
Jeez Louise. Well, yeah, we're gonna sign off this part. Thank you so much, Terry, for joining us. It's been
you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So enlightening and enriching, and hopefully we'll do it again before too long. And I'll drop you an email tomorrow with all the links and everything on. So
thank you.
3man.org. It's been up there all this time. 3man.org. You can read loads of Terry's articles going back years and years and years. A whole archive there of interesting stuff and history to digest. So encourage everyone who's listening and watching to go and
pay a visit.
And soak it in. Right. Fantastic.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah. See you soon, Terry. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers, Terry.
Take care, then.
Bye.
Yeah.